think to me, Dr. Mittal, I think the basic principle should be costing should not necessarily be linked to pricing.
Exactly.
Bola, correct.
Ji.
But a linked question then will be who will set the pricing.
First of all, the producer himself has to say clearly this is his cost.
नहीं, फिर तो आप cost और price को link कर रहे हो ना.
He has to say clearly this is his cost.
पर हो गया. But then who sets the pricing?
क्यों बोलेगा? ऐसे तो फिर साथ बात ही नहीं होगी. अगर प्रोड्यूसर ये कहे, अगर मैंने आपसे पूछा तो बिजनेस में होता है.
I think we'll come back to this towards, because my basic point is right now if you link cost and pricing, there is a model. Now if you say let's de-link the two,
exactly,
correct, let's de-link the two, then someone has to agree and set the price, whether it is the government, whether it is the public, whether it is a regulator, in some way, someone will have to set the price.
The cost. Somebody has to bear the cost. That cost can either come from revenue or it will go to the producer if he gives his price in a legitimate manner.
Correct, absolutely. So I think, and maybe we can discuss this again during the discussion time. How does one set the price if one delinks it to the cost? There has to be a model by which if someone is setting a price, it should be acceptable to all. And that sort of opens up a whole Pandora's box of how to set the pricing. And Dr. Asolkar made an interesting comment of a differential pricing, which will make it even more interesting in terms of setting a pricing based on the location or other aspects. I think maybe we could take that up in the discussion phase. I now invite Mr. Vikram Soni. Mr. Vikram Soni, as he says, is an activist on this subject, has been actively involved in the Aravali project, I understand from him. I would like to invite him to share his views on this topic.
Okay, I never said that, but firstly I must thank you and Professor Tare for inviting me here on a subject in which I have no expertise. So I'm going to talk perhaps more like somebody in the audience. Okay, so I don't know, I heard that, I didn't even know what the subject was. I actually found out after coming here. I think the first thing, if we are going to look at the cost of water, is that we are forgetting that in India, all our sources of water are either getting lost or polluted. And this is going to be, in the final analysis, the largest cost that we are going to see. Why I'm saying this is because apart from the population going 3 times up since independence, the amount of water storage in the country, from the loss of forests, from the loss of glaciers and from silting, the amount of storage in the country has also gone down by half. And we have lost in half the country most of the groundwater. So at this moment of time we have half the water and 3 times the population. And unfortunately, a lot of the sources are getting polluted. Now, how do you estimate this cost? As a matter of fact, it's very difficult to estimate it. It is just irreparable loss at the moment. But it must be given a cost, because the cost is much more than any other cost. Secondly, I disagree with what people are saying over here from the industry completely. They don't realize that when you drink water, mineral water is water that actually we are used to because it shares a history of co-evolution with us and our ancestors. And this water that we need must have nutrients which come when the water percolates through a forest and the humus and then passes through the rock to pick up the minerals. This is the water that we actually need, not RO water. Okay, so there is a huge mistake being made that the water that we consume at least and the water that's good for agriculture is not natural water. Natural water is very different from processed water, and I think there's no way you can get to natural water from processed water, primary, secondary or tertiary. Now, so therefore what I'm trying to make a pitch for is something very small, that the first thing we need to do is to protect our water sources with our lives. All right? All this stuff about commerce is not going to help at all. Okay, the next thing is, so that is the biggest cost. Next cost is, before I go to industry, I'm just going to tell you a little bit I know about cities. The price of water in Paris and in Germany, all the water comes there free from sources which are lakes and the Seine from not very far away. The population of Paris is 1/5 of the population of France, but it's only of the order of 10 to 12 million, which makes it a little bit like Delhi. But they charge you €3 per kiloliter. And in this cost, there is no cost of the water. There is no treatment of the water, there is no recycling. The water is coming naturally. So the entire cost of the water is just the sewage treatment. So I was very puzzled to see some of the previous speakers saying that the cost of the water is to treat it to some level is much less. So just for putting it back into the river or into the natural systems, it is 220 rupees per kiloliter. Okay, no, you can contest that later on in the discussion. I'm telling you data which I have from people who work in the École des Mines in Paris, which is what controls all these things. They are also professors. Now, if that is going to be the cost of water to recycle, unfortunately, Paris is not disturbing its faraway landscape like the Himalayas, whereas Delhi gets 40% of its water from the Ganga, 30% from the Yamuna, and about 20-25% from the Beas and the Satluj. And all these are coming from places like the Tehri dams, which are being devastating as far as the water catchments are concerned. So it doesn't even have that cost included. So we have to think twice about what is the cost of water in Delhi. And if we are going to treat all the water in Delhi for sewage, to me it seems that the equipment is the same and there's not very much manual labor involved, that just to treat water, to discharge it properly in the surroundings is huge. And this business about no pollution, I don't understand, because obviously you are depolluting the water when you have a sewage treatment plant. So you have to throw all that waste somewhere. And we haven't even talked about that. Where are you going to throw it? So I think that my view and the view of industry, mine is an audience view, is very, very different in this matter. Now, as far as pricing is concerned, I have a very simple suggestion, which I happen to be more or less ineffective advisor to the Jal Board because it's in an honorary capacity. But I would suggest that at least 50 to 75 liters of water per day per person should be free, almost free. And I would suggest that if from 75 to 150 we should charge half the value of tanker water. At the moment, you can say half of 1,200 rupees per 10 kiloliters, because 10,000 liters is what a tanker carries. And anybody consuming more than 150 per capita per person should be charged the full value of tanker water, because they can afford it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be. And otherwise, there'll be no sensitivity to water. So I'm just saying that this tiered system or this differential system is a system that we might need in the cities. Now, as far as industry goes, since that seems to have come up, I think you see, okay, let me just make a point. The sewage that we discharge from our kitchens and from our toilets is something that's bad for many, many reasons. It carries disease, but it's biotic. The river can actually manage to clean that up after the water has traveled for 100 kilometers. Okay, sun, air, all kinds of mixing and circulation will clear that water. But industrial sewage, heavy metals or anything cannot be cleared. So in industry you need very, very strict procedures to pull all this out before any water is discharged. Okay, what are the costs? How they're going to be borne, I do not know. But just as charging people in Delhi the kind of tariff I'm suggesting will take care of the sewage, charging industry, which is of course supposed to be very rich, unless of course they're running at a loss, in which case they would actually, in any case, go bankrupt, is the obvious way to go. I mean, you have to make sure that you don't discharge, because once you discharge these things in the water, these things can be quite lethal. Otherwise, as far as all this sewage goes, the river cleans itself once a year at high flood level every year. And if the Rhine can be cleaned, and the Thames can be cleaned, and the Hudson can be cleaned, and the Elbe, I mean, there is no problem because we have sewage. as long as we put these plants over there. So that takes care of these two things. Maybe I'll take one more minute. I wanted to say that I've already said something about mineral water. That's a third kind of water which has gone commercial, and we've all talked about it. 35 rupees for 1 liter Himalayan, and how much did you say? I don't know, 120 rupees for Evian. Now, I'm not expecting anybody to drink Evian. It was completely stupid. But if the forests are maintained, and if you pass through a rocky formation, the ridge in Delhi can give you mineral water which is as good as Evian or Paris. Okay, the question is, we haven't done it, but that is the water that human beings need to consume. Because otherwise you don't even get your trace elements. RO water, which we are having all the time, is actually extremely bad for your health because it pulls everything out. There's a membrane, water is pushed through it, all the radicals, everything is removed. It's almost like distilled water. And so I feel that goes back again to preserving water sources, okay? And the charge for this is huge. And where I agree with Mr. Asolkar and everybody is that why are people willing to pay so much? Because they think it's healthy, when you could actually get it in your backyard. I mean, that is the crazy thing. Why can't people pay 2 rupees more for water? Of course they can. So I don't think there's an issue there. We shouldn't go to commercial. On the cell phone, as you said, I totally agree. These are psychological things. Finally, I'd just like to say that agriculture is a huge consumer of water. And maybe it is time to encourage people to be more efficient with agriculture and to be not so wasteful, that you charge something for agriculture, even though it's going to be hugely unpopular, if 80% goes over there. And where India has to watch out in the future is with projects like DMIC, the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. As you saw from the transparencies in the first talk, that about 40% or 35% of all the water in the United States goes to energy-related industry, and about 55 to 58% or something like 60% goes to industry in general. Agriculture only takes 30%. Now, if we make that industrial corridor, we have 80% for agriculture and 60% for industry, 140% water we are going to use in the most water-short part of the world, not of India, because there's no groundwater there, and most rivers are subscribed to much more than 50%. So somewhere in this whole business, the pricing has to be there, the humanitarian aspect has to be there, because after all, this water has to be provided to people who cannot afford it. Right now, even a World Bank study says that rich people like us, what we pay for water, I don't know exactly what the charges are, 4 rupees or 5 rupees a kiloliter. The poor people get their water from tankers, and if they don't have a card or some identity, then they have to pay much more for it. Their estimate is that the really poor people who live in jhuggies or tenements are paying 10 times more for water than we are. So this is a very bad sociological situation. And I think the kind of pricing that I'm suggesting is the way to go for cities and industries. And that's all I can say as part of the audience on this subject. Thank you.
I think Mr. Soni was being a bit economical with truth when he said he is not knowledgeable on this subject. I think he was fairly clear in terms of his point of view. I think we throw the floor open now for questions. Anyone who wants to make a comment or raise a question is invited to do so now. And if you have a question to a specific person in the panel, if you could mention that also.
I just have one question to Dr. Mittal. You said that the producer should pay for it.
I didn't say, I said producer should tell the cost.
Producer should tell the
cost.
Tell the cost. So the person who produces wastewater.
Pardon?
The person who produces the wastewater, how will he tell the cost? The person who uses the toilet. You are using the toilet, you are producing the problem. So will you tell the cost? Every household will tell the cost?
That's a spin, Professor Tare, on the word called production.
No, because the use of the toilet creates the wastewater. If you avoid use of the toilet, there is no